Wacława Szpakowskiego, dla której praca i dorobek Wacława Szpakowskiego jest pretekstem, ważną częścią też, ale jego prace wchodzą w dialog z szeregiem artystów wybranych do tej wystawy przez kuratorkę Ingę Lāce. I dzisiaj spotkanie właśnie będzie dotyczyło tego, co można zobaczyć, chociaż w tej chwili akurat nie można zobaczyć, co można było przez krótki czas zobaczyć, ale mamy nadzieję, że muzeum znowu będzie otwarte i w tej chwili, o ile dobrze pamiętam, wystawa zaplanowana jest do końca lutego, także mamy nadzieję, że Państwo będziecie mieli jeszcze szansę zajrzeć do muzeum. Z uwagi na obecność naszego gościa z Łotwy spróbujemy prowadzić tę rozmowę w języku angielskim, więc teraz spróbujemy przejść na ten język, a ja za chwilkę przedstawię gości. So, it's a pleasure to appear on your screens tonight with an inspired pair of speakers to discuss about the exhibition Riga Notebook, following the lines of Wacław Szpakowski. And it's no coincidence that we are hosting the curator of the exhibition and one of the artists today. So let me introduce Inga Lāce, the curator at the Latvian Center for Contemporary Art. Inga lives in Riga but works worldwide. She was curator of the Latvian pavilion of the Venice Biennale 2019 and has been co-curator of few editions of a contemporary art festival Survival Kit. She worked in Amsterdam, Stockholm, and now in Łódź, much more creative place than these unknown Western cities. I'm also delighted to welcome acclaimed artist Janek Simon. Let me say omnivorous artist.
Hello.
To use the term of Richard Peterson. So his interests are very wide, included identity politics, colonialism, translation, artificial intelligence, and technology. A retrospective of his works was given pride of a place at Warsaw Jazdowski Castle Center of Contemporary Art in 2019. And this book, the book Synthetic Folklore, is the aftermath of this exhibition. Maybe we could talk a little about this book later. The Synthetic Folklore series was presented at Janek Simon's solo exhibition Machine Learning Folklore at Russell Gallery this year, as well as in the group exhibition Folklore at Centre Pompidou Metz in France also this year. He also works as a curator, what will be important for our discussion. So, Inga, let me start with a general impression after seeing the exhibition. What stands out is the strong mark of a curator's work, curator's touch. Can you say something more about the process of subjective selection of the artists you associate with Szpakowski's work?
Thank you, Karol. Thank you for invitation to this discussion and for the generous introduction. So when I started to work with a legacy of Wacław Szpakowski, one of the kind of main points was the fact that he had spent quite a lot of time in Riga, and that in Riga he sort of came up with this theory of rhythmical lines by studying there in the Riga Technical University, by observing things around him, by going on field trips across.
Hello.
Basically also by sort of starting to really draw and work with this abstract form or this the simplest of the forms, the lines. So somehow through all these impressions that he gained, he sort of really took the essence of that. So that would be the line. And also he was really thinking about the rhythm, and that rhythm that is appearing in his work, like in this essence, it also somehow like, even though there is no direct relationship, it somehow reverberates or mirrors these underlying rhythms in the world, like which are underlying structures or rhythms of like nature and processes in the nature, or processes like if we see city as one thread or one fabric, let's say, or if we also think about, I don't know, things like how mind works, they're or the computer system nowadays, right? And so thinking about all those things in Wacław Szpakowski's practice, I was really taking this liberty to search these alliances across time and space in very different artistic practices, where I would see either like formal connection, so like visual connection, but not only that, or mostly I would look for certain also sort of how his interests would also be similar to the interests of the other artists that are in the exhibition. So for instance, yeah, if he was interested in architecture, then I immediately thought about like Latvian artist Evita Vasiljeva, who is a young Latvian artist. She works nowadays, and her pieces are not at all like Wacław Szpakowski's, you know, are like just drawings. Like so there are these two dimensions, and then for Evita Vasiljeva, it's like spatial installations. It's from concrete and steel rebars, and it refers or it has this kind of one reference to this modernist architecture, which we all have like quite, I think, vivid memories, like especially in this part of the world where, you know, like everyone has maybe like grown up in the block houses or visited these block houses, which were this kind of utopian project of modern architecture. And yeah, so I would look for these sort of alliances that either open up his interests in this contemporary way. Yeah, and in a similar way, also we could think about Janek's practice, because if, you know, Wacław Szpakowski at his time was interested in folklore and different, like, and basically was, yeah, sort of drawing, making notes of different vernacular architecture of like belts, fabrics, whatever he could like find, then I think, yeah, like how Janek uses and works with folklore, and then AI is a very contemporary iteration of perhaps very similar concerns or ideas.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for giving us an insight of the whole preparation process. I was talking about this curator's touch. Yeah? Many artists from Eastern European region, not only from different generations, not well known in Poland. So maybe let's talk a little longer about the role of a curator and the contemporary trend. So blurring the line between the role of the artist and the role of a curator. So I would like to ask Janek, do you agree that the artist today is also a curator? And I'm not thinking about your curatorial projects in the strict sense. In your case, for example, Goldex Poldex, Szalona Galeria, Prince Polonia, exhibition of foreign artists living in Poland. I'm thinking about these artistic projects, for example, Polish Cultural Season in Madagascar, the Sea magazine, Europol, or Alang Transfer. How can you comment this blurring process?
Well, I would not draw a line between these projects. So for me, it's not like, you know, these projects are curatorial, these projects are artistic. This is the first thing. I think, well, now actually, well, that of course, I mean, answer to this question, of course, depends on how you define the position of the curator. in the first place. And now, what I think now is that the position of the curator is actually more a power position than anything else. So this is the main difference, that artists are very rarely, are in position of power, of having power, and curators are. And also artists are not really fundraising and are not really doing public relations, and curators are doing that. So for me, I think, but that's like a fresh thought, that actually the curator is more, I see the curator more as I said, like a fund. Now I think this position means fundraising and public relations more than picking up artists and like even exhibition making. So I think like the old school curators are more artists, and artists are never really curators in a way. I'm not sure if this is clear. So I think that I'm not really a curator, and all these projects were basically artistic, different phases of my artistic practice. I don't know if
I was thinking about two processes in curator activity: the creative process and the selection process. The choice of something as a work of art, and now the author, the artist, is one who selects and authorizes something as art, like you did it in, for example, Alang Transfer project, or the Sea magazine, or Polish cultural season in Madagascar. So this is the reason why I'm thinking about similarities. And I see, for example, post-production in your activity, ready-mades, especially in Alang Transfer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. This is, you can like a found object. No, I mean, but it's been part of. Has been a recognized and established practice in contemporary art for more than 100 years. So I don't think this is
something new.
Something new for sure, but something that's somehow connected to the curatorial also, because I don't know.
Yeah, I think I see what Janek is trying to point out, because really all the other functions that you describe, it's very institutional. It's all this institutional apparatus that curators could be seen as gatekeepers of, like of this representation, of the platform, of the budget, of the funding. But I guess what Karol is talking about is more this like creative process where you are also doing research as a curator as well, and like finding stories, and then thinking which stories or which I don't know, artists or which objects or which voices to kind of amplify, and to which stories to like tell in this spatial or whichever structure that you choose. But
nie słyszymy za bardzo wyraźnie, Janek, też twoich wypowiedzi. Właśnie teraz słyszę, że przerywa nasza transmisja. Nie wiem, czy ty słyszysz nas bez problemu w tym momencie.
No wiesz co, ciebie słyszę, we are just talking about some transmission glitches. So I can hear you, I can hear Karol pretty well, and Inga sometimes it's goes off.
Okay, but I hear
you hear me
quite well. Yes.
Okay, so let's continue.
Yeah. So coming back to what Inga said, I mean, for me, the bigger difference is between having power and, like, when we discuss the blurring boundary between the artist and the curator. So for me, I think artists are artists and curators are becoming artists. It's more like that than the other way, that artists are becoming curators, because artists are not really Even if you amplify certain things or use found objects or even work with other or create space for other artists to actually work, I think this is all extension of my artistic practice. So
Inga, or
hello,
maybe
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Mhm.
And Inga, maybe the exhibition is also a work of art. When the curator will be an artist or at least a creator, what do you think about it?
Yeah.
The selection process is the same, maybe.
Yeah, I think it totally could be, but also this is not so much, I guess, the discussion that that is interesting or at play, I think, because as Janek says, like it goes also towards certain kind of power relations, and that's maybe where like you then really have to speak about a lot of institutional and structural issues and different kind of like precarities that are created within the art field. Whereas, but when I think about this exhibition, of course, like I don't think about myself as an artist, maybe especially because of that. Like it's not a prior kind of thought at all. Like I don't really think about that comparison. It is a creative process, but I don't know. Like we just recently I was reading this text by David Graeber and Nika, which I'm forgetting the name, published by eFlux, and they were in general talking about this creative practice and how art institutions and have made it very exclusive. So as if like that things that happen in the museum, you know, and they are done by artists and chosen by curators are somehow more important than things that, you know, creative people do, like creative processes. And of course, it's also like quite an obvious thought and we know it. And but then they were referring to this early Soviet principle of prolet cult, right, which you also, I guess, know, and saying that, you know, there was this very small utopian moment when those cultural houses that were kind of everywhere around the world, they were sort of maybe gaining, like, I don't know, similar importance to to things that are shown in the museum, for instance, or and that maybe brings us back more towards this COVID condition and how many countries were comparing, like how much COVID support do they get, and ones were complaining about that they get less than the others. For instance, like I think everywhere in the Eastern Europe, we would look up to Germany and say like, well, Germany like really supported, or like Sweden really supported their cultural institutions well. And then within this article, they were somehow making this comparison that like, oh, is this really the system that we have created, which is rather exclusive to certain practices and that should be supported, right? Like towards the future. And I'm not saying that I agree because I think, you know, like coming and working quite a lot in Eastern Europe, I see the precarity of the system as such where I'm working. So I don't see it's so like overfunded and you know, so I wouldn't sort of immediately agree to that, but there is something in this thought, I think, to think about, and that maybe relates to your question as well. This kind of gradation of creativity, of creative practices, that it's not so evident that the systems that we have are the best or not even the only, right? And that they could potentially change.
Okay. I was talking about my first impression connected with this curator's touch, but I have a second thought concerning this research beyond language research, what we see on the Riga Notebook exhibition. So maybe we could talk about the autonomy of a visual iconic sphere and its relation with language. Does art have a chance to say something original, or artists presented at the exhibition could say us something more than we find in books, for example?
Maybe.
Inga, please,
yeah.
Maybe. Let me quote your observation from your presentation at the opening of the exhibition. When we see artists using the language of abstraction, they do it to understand and explore the mechanisms which underline not only the processes of shaping society, creating information flow system, but also organizing the functioning of cities and architecture. These processes are often invisible. It's important for artists to present them. Is it connected with my second thought?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's I will maybe answer by quoting this artist, Janis Waldheims, because one very important in this exhibition artist who is in dialogue with Wacława Szpakowskiego is a Latvian exile artist in Canada, Janis Waldheims, and he was born like in 1909 and passed away in 1993. And he escaped from Latvia to Canada after the Second World War. And basically, he was not an artist in the first place, but he was a lawyer. He was trained as a lawyer, and he never could get his diploma, or really practice, because the Second World War broke out, right? And I think that's how maybe into him was a certain sense of justice and later injustice, because after the Second World War, like the world order that was there seemed very unjust, with Soviet Union having occupied previously independent countries, meaning his former home place, Latvia. And he was extremely angry at the Western countries who have allowed this to happen and never, did anything to his mind. And to understand this injustice, he turned towards reading a lot of Western philosophy, literature, history, whatever he could get in the library in Montreal. And so it was interesting that how he very enthusiastically got towards this endeavor. And he was thinking first that he would write a moralistic treatise or a text explaining the wrongdoings of those countries or politicians, by writing by an essay, basically. But more and more he read and worked, and he started to make small notes on those books, on the edges of the books, and creating his own system where certain terms were referring to certain shapes, and then later he would kind of extract those shapes, meaning in reference to terms to sketches, and then create drawings. So after all, there was nothing really textual left, except some notes. And so so I was looking at his diaries, and in one day, so it's Monday, November 3, 1969, when he says, "So like every Monday, it is somehow difficult to resume the weekly routine. I start by reading Henry Poincaré, but soon I find him less perfect than Cassirer and Whale. He writes too much to say something without ever thinking to draw something. That is not so simple. I think that in the future, artists in painting will be the best to explain theories, more than by writing that currently dominates." And so when I actually got to know that this is how this artist thinks, that this is the way how he sees the world, that by drawing you can explain these theories best, it really made me think about it. And even though this thought may seem quite naive, I see a really amazing potential there, because there are things that are too complex to be understood, to be explained in language, and the other way around, of course, also. But I think it's an amazing idea that you could explain certain theories really visually, like through, you know, colors and shapes, and maybe maybe that's where that's exactly this artist is where someone that kind of where I've got my inspiration or interest in abstract form, in abstract visual language, in non-representational, non-figurative.
I'm wondering if artistic activity can conquer the knowledge which is connected with this traditional knowledge producers. And maybe I would ask Janek, what is the cultural position of knowledge produced by artists from Central and Eastern Europe? I think that in your works you are interested in, for example, do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Can you do?
So, I don't hear you now.
No, I just said.
Okay.
So maybe I'll try to break it into 2 parts. So what is the status of knowledge produced by artists in general first, and then maybe say something more about Eastern European artists. Okay. Yeah. Well. I'm sorry. I have to.
Maybe I could say something more about my impression about your works. I think that in your works you are interested in, for example, central periphery relations, post-colonial perspective, hybrid.
Oh, yeah, something that I've been working for years, actually, starting with the projects about the Polish colonial aspirations in the 30s, the Polish cultural season in Madagascar. Yeah, the question is, well, behind one of the was to what extent, of course, Europe is responsible for, you know, the colonialism, yeah, because we didn't have colonies, and this is used as also an argument now in political discussions now that, for example, we don't have any responsibility to take care about refugees because this is a legacy of Western European colonial politics. So now they deal with that. But on the other hand, our economic development now is something that wouldn't happen without Western European colonial expansion, because we are somehow on the periphery of that system and indirectly profiting from it. So Poland would not be that developed as it is today without Germany's development and further west, like the Western European colonial powers development. So this is kind of an interesting question. To what extent we are responsible for colonialism, and to what extent do we still profit from that? So yeah, the Polish cultural season on Madagascar was kind of trying to ask these questions by looking at unrealized Polish dreams of getting a colony from the 30s.
Okay.
So yeah, that's first. That was looking at the position of the Eastern Europe. But also now, I think, well, in last years, especially with projects like synthetic folklore, I'm kind of changing the perspective and trying to look, maybe not look at differences between places, but to look for some ways of unifying them. You know, because I think the thought behind synthetic folklore is, I mean, this project is in a way a speculation about some process that could lead to like non-violent establishing of a universal set of values. Yeah, like universalism. Universalism is in a way seen as again a product of Western European colonial politics. But on the other hand, I think that we do need a certain set of universal values. So the question is how to build them, how to kind of construct these values. And the speculation, the thought behind the synthetic folklore is that maybe you can use AI or machine learning algorithms somehow to actually build up this set of values, to negotiate this, however you define this kind of universal set of values.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if I answered your question. But,
thinking about your book and your works connected with synthetic folklore, I had in front of my eyes Łukasz Stanek's text. He's not an artist. He's an anthropologist and sociologist, and he's interested in Polish architects in the Middle East. And I found a very eye-catching phrase or term by Tony Judd, geocultural bovarism. So the desire to take a better place on the world map of prestige and respect than the macroeconomic indicators of development and quality of life in post-socialist countries would suggest. And this is my third impression, thinking about not only synthetic folklore, but also about other projects of Janek Simon. Do you agree that this geocultural bovarism is a good term to describe your earlier projects?
Yeah, why not? Sure.
Inga, you are showing us other artists from East Europe or East Central Europe. Do you agree that there's something special to say, and how you can describe the position on the art world map?
Yeah, like I think there certainly is a position, and there is some sort of I think again it's like set of different structural, like infrastructural, maybe even yeah, not so often cultural maybe preconditions that are connected actually to art ecosystem as such, which I think then influence perhaps trajectories or of success of career, that for sure. But then in relation to like themes and concepts and work, like I think that's in a way like nowadays it's as diverse as it gets, because there's been so much blending in this kind of global contemporary art world, I think. But maybe the fact that I work with artists who come from Latvia, from the Baltics, from Central Eastern Europe, it's again, it's not so much a precondition like a choice, but it's also like a place where I come from. So perhaps it's something that is more familiar to me immediately. So it could be, and I think we should also acknowledge that if we come from here, that it's completely normal to do that and not to say, oh, but it's specifically about Central and Eastern Europe. It's the same as, before there would be a curator from, I don't know, any other Western country and wouldn't include anyone from Eastern Europe or Global South or whatever. So it should be considered, I think, in the same kind of importance and of narrative and everything, as if there would be also other artists. But at the same time, it's not only like artists from Eastern Europe, right? And many of the Latvian artists are actually living abroad, like the ones that are in the exhibition. So for instance, like if we speak about those geographic trajectories, and I think I only realized it later that so many of the artists are in the show have certain kind of migratory histories. In a way, Wacława Szpakowski, he somehow represented that early 20th century migration, which was so normal. It was, you know, he would be born in Poland, and then he would go to Riga, which was at the time part of Russian Empire, and then he would go back, and then all the wars followed, and then Jānis Valdheims, who was Latvian artist in exile, his trajectory was also like migratory, but you know, it was forced exile. And then the younger artists like Viktor Timofeyev and Evita Vasiljeva, they have chosen to live abroad. Like one is living in New York, and the other one is Evita Vasiljeva is now in residency in Paris, but she's lived in Amsterdam. So, and there also these boundaries are very, I think, merged between like Eastern and Western Europe, I guess, because it also depends where would they get their education. But what is interesting somehow, maybe one artist that I could talk about in that relation is Hana Miletić. And she's an artist from Croatia, from Zagreb, but living in Brussels now. And she somehow, her piece Softwares is a weaving, and that weaving, it refers to the craft itself, to the history of craft of weaving that also coincides with the history of computing, because that same like invention of a mechanical loom was then of the jacquard loom was then later also precursor to first computing machine by Ada Lovelace, right? And so and then what she does with her pieces is actually this kind of more looking at how people are doing makeshift repairs, and then she sort of is weaving those irregular repairs that she sees, like someone repaired the car with I don't know, tape, and it created a weird shape and it's just very temporary, but it's kind of nice and it's not mechanical, and then she weaves that shape and repeats it. But I think also, like, not this series specifically, but part of her work refers to this whole textile industry in former Yugoslavia, and how again, like, it was quite powerful and very important. And then again, like in the 90s, with the open borders and with different world powers, and how economic constellations changed, because the production goes, and cheaper production goes to the global south, like all these textile factories like lose money. And I think this is very interesting how it actually refers to the history of Łódź, again, also through different systems and different economic and Łódź textile history. So in a way, I guess maybe sometimes the materials that artists choose or the themes, they somehow come from the backgrounds that they've grown up, or but those things can come associatively also much later in their practice, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I would like to continue our conversation about knowledge, visuality, and language. What is interesting at the Riga Notebook exhibition are the relationships between written works, you talked about it, Inga, earlier, and visual form. In the context of the artists presented at the exhibition, we have, for example, self-comments and auto-interpretations with Wacław Szpakowski rhythmical lines, for example, notes and reading lists. In case of Waldheimis, use of archives or archivum, research and scientific theories. In case of Galano, or programming, a special new language connected with artificial intelligence in Janek Simon case. So would you like to comment on this observation, Inga or Janek? So we have this visuality inspirations and language discourse inspirations, which are connected and in many different ways. We can thinking about new knowledge which flow from this connection.
Well, I can say a few words about my work in
programming,
in relation to us. Okay, so I think there's a big difference between regular normal algorithms and machine learning, or let's say neural network, because neural networks, because this is the kind of machine learning algorithm that is used in synthetic folklore, in the creation of synthetic folklore designs. And the main difference is that with algorithms, with the classic algorithms, actually everything is in a way it's a set of instruction, like step-by-step set of instruction. So how to cook a soup? You take vegetables, put them in water, turn on the heat, etc., etc. It's like a very logical, very language-based set of instructions in a specific order. How to achieve a goal, how to cook an egg, and that's the basis of basically classical computer programming. But with neural networks, is a bit different. The things are a bit different, and with neural networks, actually, you don't really know how it works. They just work. So it's not declarative in that sense that classic algorithms are. It's not easy to explain the difference without going into technical details, but there is this very, I would even say ontological difference between the classic algorithms and let's say neural networks. And they're actually, neural networks are much closer to, let's say, visual thinking than classical algorithms, which are very much embedded in language. So I think, yeah, that's my answer to the question that you asked in the case of my work, I think. So that even if these works are programmed and they are using computer programming languages, they are not algorithmic in that language sense. That means that that every step is clearly defined and in a way can be described in language. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
what
so
about
maybe Inga elaborate more on other
cases?
artists.
Yeah. What about other artists and other cases? These relations between written works and visual form.
Yeah, exactly. This is very interesting because indeed, I think there is a certain relation, tension, dialogue, or something in many of those artists' works. Like, for instance, artist Viktor Timofeyev and his video, which is also next to Janek Simon's work in the same space, and is like a ticking clock. It uses a different computer program where sort of there is in the center of that a certain kind of message which is slowly deteriorating, because like the letters that go around and that are basically from A to B, C, D, like a classical alphabet, they are slowly deteriorating. And so when A sort of changes, it also changes like the way how you can or cannot read the program or the statement. And basically it's always impossible to kind of follow up and to actually be able to read it. And somehow, it's it kind of refers in general to certain kind of abstract quality of language, or abstract quality of like that it actually, you know, it is something learned, it is something that consists of science, and what if it would be different? Like, can we learn it? Can we communicate? And all these questions kind of are inherent there in that one one piece, and I think it's interesting, yeah, that we speak quite a lot about the language kind of beyond words, and that language is like crumbling those words very literally, or that work is like showing the crumbling of words quite literally. And then there is another like Latvian artist, Amanda Ziemele. She made 3 paintings, which were to be spatially positioned, as in kind of inhabiting the space, as in trying to break with the geometry of the space. Very, they are going towards this more sensitive approach. And for her, it was really, yeah, like quite hard, I guess, to define things in words as such, because she was thinking more about like sensations that the works create. That's why like one of her pieces is called a taste bud, and some of the like surfaces, brush strokes suggest towards something rather tasty. Like it's in a way it's very literal, like you get very literal associations, but at the same time, yeah, she's thinking about taste, and how like sense of taste has historically been greatly overlooked as a means of experiencing pleasure and considered inferior to theoretical knowledge. And there she refers to Agamben. And not that this painting is actually like that you could taste it or anything, it's just what potentially it can evoke. And then again, maybe you are thinking about it unconsciously. Yeah, so this is somehow about like this reconnection of spatial and aesthetic experiences and taste. And in a way, yeah, like we are using language to describe it, but I feel like for her, she would very happily leave language out like entirely, you know, and that the work just worked in the space.
So when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about another dimension of a relationship between language and visuality. I'm thinking about the narratives behind the images and this traditional hermeneutics that decode the meaning of images. We can say about discursivization of art, for example. And I have a quotation from Michel Houellebecq book, Map and Territory, when the painter, Jed Martin, asks for a text in the catalogue accompanying the exhibition of his works. So this will be this quotation from Houellebecq. I know that you are very much in demand. Therefore, please forgive me for taking the liberty of stressing again how important, in my view and that of my galleries, your participation in the catalogue of my future exhibition would be. I attach a few photographs of my paintings, and I am at your complete disposal to present my work to you in a more complete manner, where and when you wish. It's end of quotation. So my naive observation is connected with some cultural phenomenon. In the endeavors, artists acquire advocates among recognized representatives of the academic world. For example, we could say about Pierre Bourdieu and Michael North, and their texts on Hans Hacke, Chantal Mouffe and Rosalind Deutsch, and work of Krzysztof Wodliczko, Zygmunt Bauman, who written texts for Rachel Whitehead and Mirosław Bałka. Or we could think about this book, Janek, where we find several sociologists or other academics with Jan Sowa and Aleksandra Przygalińska. And what about this connection between the theoreticians and artists, people from academia who support the public presence of artists? Can we watch modern art without them or not?
Do you want to comment on that, Janek?
Short comment. I think, yeah, of course, we can watch contemporary art without, explanations by philosophers. But I can comment on Janek Sowa because Janek Sowa is a sociologist and Polish philosopher, and he's also my friend for more than 25 years. And I think we actually really inspire each other.
The provocation.
No, we really inspired each other, I think, through our lives with different ideas. And I think some of my projects were inspirations for Janek's book, like the Fantomowe Ciało Króla. And so I think it's an exchange. It's an ongoing exchange. And we still somehow, find exchanging thoughts and ideas inspiring. And yeah. So
that's exactly my thought also. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. You may go on.
I think if I think about the people that I want to hang out with and that I found like exchange interesting, then the theoreticians are one of the first. Like of course other artists, but like theoreticians are the next, I would say, group that comes to my mind. Yeah. So judging from that, we have to have something in common.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
And just to add, I think it's like exactly. I think it's that symbiosis or that collaboration and inspiration, inspiring each other. Because to me, like another example would be, for instance, like Donna Haraway, where like Fabrizio Terranova made this wonderful film about her and about her like this storytelling for earthly survival, right? And somehow those ideas that she has as a theoretician, researcher, they sort of gain this amazing visual form and visual world with the eyes and the work of the filmmaker. So I think it can go both ways, and it can then reach very many different audiences. But of course, yeah, it can go different ways. Yeah, but I think it's the interesting part when also the dialogue is the other way around, for instance.
Maybe this cultural phenomena is connected with the growing importance of the role of a curator, and our previous remarks on this topic compared to other positions in the art world. So maybe the importance of a mediation between the artist and his work and the audience is not only the role of his philosophers or sociologists, but also a role of a curator. So the artists who create art that are difficult or defined as difficult, perceived the curator essential for translating the art. What do you think, Inga? it could be connected with your role as a curator, this translational aspect of this relation.
Like one part, like in Latvia, when we organized the exhibition, right? There is this moment when we work with art mediators, and then there is this moment when this exhibition is somehow, it lives its own life in the voice or in the hands of the critics that write about it in the daily newspaper. And that daily newspaper, it's much more heard than my voice would, ever be, like in any art, I don't know, magazine or somewhere. So I think it would be, too ambitious to say it's just this one role of curator. It's the work of so many. And I think it should be seen as that.
Mm-hmm. And what about the power of these interpretations? And I was thinking about this term of Michel Foucault, rarefaction of artistic activity. So this eruption of statements that make art and artists its object, comments imposing the meaning of artistic expression. Do you agree that this power is also an aspect of this activity?
Yeah, power, and with power also the responsibility, maybe, because it's important what kind of stories we tell today. I think Janek wants to say something.
Yes.
But really, no, I know, but just as wrap up about this power of curator. I mean, I am saying that yes, it's the work of many, but at the same time, I do realize that the power of the gatekeeper or the gate opener, and again, like in terms of who you represent at which point, and with whom to work, and how to have these more feminist, queer, decolonial agendas in terms of which kind of stories we tell, which artists we represent. It's very important, like inherently important. But I think it's almost a given. It's just has to be there, that responsibility, and not to abuse this power, but to actually think how to use it in an empowering way. That help this society in some ways, And now, Janek, you please.
Is that something?
No,
Yeah.
what I just wanted to add is maybe what Karol said. This is something even more visible when it comes to the market. That I think art market needs this kind of one-liner explanations, like what is this artist about? No, when you get that actually can really empower you when it comes to the market, especially like the high level of the art market. Not that you need this kind of really simple two-sentence explanation of what all your work is about. That this really somehow simplifies things when it comes to selling and to the market, that people can instantly understand like what your work is about, or can somehow
Okay.
Yeah, and there maybe this something that is emancipatory can also turn into just like putting in boxes, and kind of becomes also very simplified or something. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. That's something that escape and make it difficult to put me into a box, I think.
Okay. Ja może teraz
But if your practice is complex and multifaceted, then it really makes it more difficult for you in the kind of art market, field.
Mam też takie właśnie teraz momenty, kiedy nie słyszę moich rozmówców, więc może skorzystam z okazji, bo przekroczyliśmy właśnie godzinę, jest godzina 19, więc rozmawiamy tutaj godzinę. Braliśmy też pod uwagę Państwa pytania, które właśnie poprzez Facebook możecie zadawać. Ja poproszę ewentualnie koleżanki, które nas wspierają, o sygnał, czy mamy jakieś pytania do naszych gości, bo ja mam podgląd wyłącznie na naszą rozmowę, nie widzę tego, co dzieje się na Facebooku. I'm asking for Facebook reaction. Yeah, we have no comments, no interventions. So thank you, Inga, Janek. Thank you for this really informative conversation. Many thanks for your thought-provoking answers or statements. I listened to your comments with great interest. Janek, thank you for your contribution to the discussion. I really look forward for the next projects, both of you. We want more, especially in Łódź. Stay safe, be well. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
Karol.
bye.
Thank you, Janek. Bye, good night.